and I got a youth fair ticket. I met a businessman from Canada or the US, and he walked me through how to get that youth ticket, which are harder to get, and I couldn't get a second one in easily, which would have raised the price by like 5 times. So again, shoestring budget, right? This is the whole backpacker experience. And so I'm on the plane and I am like, you have got to be kidding me. Nope, the plane's going to crash, get off the plane. And I flung myself in my seat and I said, I am not getting off this plane. If I'm supposed to die today, if I'm not supposed to die today, fix the plane. There was a few extra swear words in there, but that was the gist of it.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. As with every week, I'm your host, Bill Ream. And as with every week, we have another spectacular guest. I did not use the word fantastic this week as I usually do. This week, we have a spectacular guest. We have another author, and I don't mean to say that as let's lump in all of our authors together, but because everyone has different styles and everyone is unique in their own way. But we have an incredible author this week. We have Kristine on the podcast. And as I do each week, I would like to allow you to introduce yourself. Kristine, welcome to the show. And if you wouldn't mind telling the listeners, who are you?
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. My name is Kristine Madera, and I, like you said, am an author. And I have a novel out called God and Drag that I wrote using my experience in India and volunteering at Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying as part of the influence of the book. I also write the Etiquette Express travel guides, and the first ones will be coming out hopefully by the beginning of May for Mexico, just in time for the World Cup. And I have other travel writing that I have done and that I'm continuing to do in the form of essays and other books and that kind of thing. And I am very happy to be here.
Excellent. And it has all of the writing that you've done over the years. And first of all, how long have you been writing? And has it all been travel based and travel related?
I have been writing since I was a kid, not necessarily for publication, but because that's how I process experiences. Like even when I'm traveling and things are happening, I'm writing about that because it slows my mind down. It allows me to kind of really process things. So that's always been a part of my life. But most of my writing for publication has been either influenced by travel or it has been part of like how we change from various kinds of experiences, and travel is a big one of those. So I have also been a clinical hypnotherapist. So I'm all about how do we change our stories and our internal stories and our external stories. And a great way to understand yourself and to understand your story from a completely different perspective is to travel and see how you operate in a different culture, because it really shows you all the things that are hidden about yourself, your ideas, your thoughts, and your culture.
That's excellent. So how are you with, I guess, let me kind of backtrack. Is it sort of an expertise of yours to be able to kind of dissect that in a way, like how to make sense of how these experiences in other countries and other cultures are affecting you? Like, I guess if I came to you and said, listen, I just traveled to these countries, I had all these great experiences, help me make sense of what I experienced and why is this affecting me so much? Is that something you are like good with? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And yes, I am, but I've never had somebody come to me from a travel experience and just to please help me process my experience. It's always been like I had this critical incident and please help me understand that. And then the whole conglomeration of who they were before they left and who they were after they got back and what was contributing to the experience becomes part of it, because somehow I'm really good at that. which made me a really good clinical hypnotherapist. So I'm good at kind of pulling the little threads in a person's life and helping them make sense of the whole by seeing the threads that they might not have known about themselves. And travel is one of those things that is illuminating. And so it is a lot of fun to talk about people or talk with people about their trips and how it has changed them. But nobody's ever come to me and said, "Help me make sense of this trip." Like that's not the avenue that I usually have those conversations with people.
I suppose that makes sense in a way. Would be kind of cool to have that kind of a conversation, I think, because I think many of us probably, especially if you haven't experienced world travel, and when you do for the first time, I think all of us, or not, maybe not all of us, most of us realize that it can be very profound and very
Mhm.
much life altering. And I know that it was for me, absolutely. I never sat back and said, I wonder why this really affected me so much, but it would have been a very interesting, and probably still would be today, a very interesting conversation just to learn more about myself and about why does it change us so much? Why does it affect us so much? You can say, dumb it down and say it's just other people living their lives in a different area, but it really is so life altering. At least
It
it
is.
said for me, and I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think it illuminates, like, all the things that are hidden that you don't really realize are kind of running your patterns and your programs, and so those all get disrupted anytime you're traveling, and sometimes that's anytime you're traveling even in the same country, like, the most, um, culture shock I've ever experienced was not traveling overseas, it was actually living in a different part of the United States. So, which kind of because I had an expectation that there would be a lot of sameness in this place, like rural Appalachian, Pennsylvania, and I came from suburban Southern California. And even though I had traveled quite a bit of the world before I got there, like I was just completely floored. Like it really brought up a bunch of stuff for me. But to your point, I've been thinking about how do I write a book because that's how I process things, right? That would help people to do that, companion them through an experience or be something that they can work on afterward to really look at their experience and how it might have changed them. So thank you for planting that seed again. So I write books to understand things as much as to help other people understand things.
That's great. Now I feel responsible for making you feel like you have more work to do.
Oh no, books are fun. So
Yeah.
that's good.
No, excellent. And you're not actively practicing anymore, is that correct? You're mostly focused on the writing?
Yeah, currently I'm mostly focused on the writing. I do have, former clients and I do have a lot of people that know that that's my expertise and because they're my friends or family or something, or they just talk to me in the grocery store line and for whatever reason, they're attracted to me to talk about something. And we do a little bit of work right there in the grocery store line. It's just kind of a natural part of my life, but I'm not doing it professionally anymore.
So then, in those instances, do you just say, "Well, just give me a gift card or something, buy me some
Well,
vegetables"?
I mean, honestly, I figure life just organizes itself around everybody doing what they can do for people in the moment and that it will come back to you in one way or another. So I've been very blessed in my life. And so when something like that happens, it's just a gift that I give to people. I don't expect anything in return.
No, that's excellent. I was just being sarcastic, but no, that's really cool. Can you expand a little bit, Christine, on what before we get into like the bulk of what we talk about on this show, which
Mhm.
is travel. But can you talk a little bit more about, and it is obviously it is travel based. You mentioned a little bit about what the one novel is about, and you said something about the travel guides. Could you expand a little bit on what those are about, in case someone's interested in checking those out?
Right. Okay. So God and Drag is a novel that it takes place in India and kind of in this hospice area in Varanasi, India. And it's really about a man who's from California, not Southern California, but he was raised in a commune and his guru slash stepfather had left when he was young. And he later had an idea of what his life was, and he realized it was built on a lie, and once he realized that, he went back to try to find this man, and he ended up with this kinda critical incident that exposed him to something pretty catastrophic. Ended up volunteering at a Varanasi hospice, and it is him, this very gritty kind of Harley driving character trying to sort through his crisis of faith and searching for his friend as he's working at this Far Lasting hospice around people who are dying with 3 other Western volunteers, everybody who is also kind of running from their own secret past. So it's fun, it's gritty, it's fairly literary, but it's very accessible, and everybody who's read it really liked it. So, even if it sounds like weird to you, give it a try. And the Etiquette Express guides, what I see is a missing piece right now in travel literature because as things have moved from, like the Lonely Planet books and the things that I carried around in my backpack or as I was traveling to, apps and blogs and that kind of stuff, a lot of the ways to behave in other countries have flattened out. If we have an expectation that there's an app in the US and there's an app in Europe, it's gonna work the same way, that there's the app kind of flattens everything so that you don't have to change anything, but the way things work in every country is different. So these Etiquette Express guides really help you to navigate the country and culture that you're in on a day-to-day basis. So, like, how do people act in public? How do people act on public transportation? If you're invited to somebody's house, like, what's the etiquette when you're invited to somebody's house? How do you greet people and in what order? If you're a business traveler, what do you expect from business meetings? And how is feedback given? And what are the communication standards? And if you're an exchange student and you're staying in somebody's house, like, how does that dynamic work in that culture? Those kinds of things that kind of get lost now that many things are focused on where to go and what to do, and just assuming that because we all have the Airbnb app, it's all going to be the same.
Yeah. I think there's different cultures that are more forgiving on,
Yeah.
you know, making mistakes when it comes to etiquette than others. And so I think I agree 100% that it's definitely something that is definitely missing, because unless you're looking for it, nobody's going to put it in your face.
No,
So,
no, and different countries are more forgiving, and the more tourist-oriented a country is, the more tolerant it is for, for you to kind of be completely clueless culturally, as long as you're willing to whip out your credit card. But isn't it nice when you can be the person who's kind of on the inside, who people look at you and say, "Oh, wow, here's somebody that really gets this country and gets the people," and those are the people that get the invitations to somebody's house. Those are the people that walk away with really interesting experiences of connecting with people versus just taking a lot of selfies as they're wandering through a city.
yeah.
And it's, it's for the casual traveler, but also for people who do a little bit more in-depth connecting. So business people, exchange students, digital nomads, and that kind of stuff, so that you can really begin to connect with the place that you're at and the people that you're at. Because for me, and I don't know what it's like for you, but like for me, when I travel, I'm less about I'm going to go see all the sights, and I'm more about I'm going to hang out in this cafe and just like soak in the scenery and talk to people and really get to know a country that way versus, oh, I saw these 6 sites today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that it's if you're in a place for the first time and maybe the only time, yeah, I'm gonna at least make a trip to see these monuments or these famous landmarks if I can. But
Hmm.
the majority of my time, absolutely, I want to eat what they eat. I want to experience what they experience. I want to try to immerse as much as possible. And obviously, I'll never be an insider. I'll never be a part of the culture necessarily, especially if I'm somewhere for 5 nights or something. But
Yeah.
I'm going to try my best to at least not stand out like a sore thumb and be, that guy.
Yeah. And if you can enter into the rhythm of a place, like Italy has a very different rhythm than like Thailand or Mexico or the US or other places. So, I mean, even being able to understand the rhythm of a place and enter into the rhythm really helps you to understand a place much differently than if you're trying to maintain like your familiar sort of schedule in this place that you are traversing. So that's another thing that the Etiquette Express guides help you to kind of let go of your idea of, well, this is when I eat, this is when I do this, and this is when I do that, to like, oh, this is how the culture flows. And how can you flow with the culture? How do you know, like, this only order cappuccinos in Italy before 11 o'clock in the morning? and not to be, and everything else after that is espresso or, something like that. And then knowing when the shops are closed, when you take your relaxation time, and why you're not eating until 9 o'clock at night, which, that's my bedtime. So it
Yeah.
would really require
And you're being
me to
like
shift.
2 hours or more.
Or more. Yeah, I know. So entering into that and having an expectation and understanding of what that is, especially if you're going to stay with a family, or, you're going to stay a little bit longer in a place and you really want to kind of get a sense of the culture, getting a sense of the cultural rhythm, and how people greet each other, and, why they do that. And to be part of that flow of life is kind of makes you feel like you're a part of that.
And listen, I'm going to recommend right now, and I'm going to be 100% honest. I haven't read them yet, even if I guess the first one's coming out soon, right? I
Yeah,
haven't,
so they're not out. You haven't read anything.
I haven't read it. So I'm just going to put that out there publicly. But I think what I would say is, to me, this is fascinating, even if I'm not interested in traveling to a place necessarily,
Mhm.
because to me, it's so interesting to learn about other cultures and the differences. So
Yeah.
even if, and I've been to Italy, but if I hadn't, I don't, what is the first one? It's their location based, obviously, right?
The location based, the first one's Mexico because of the World Cup. Oh,
Okay.
and so part of the games are playing in Mexico, but Italy is like number 2 or 3. I think Germany and Italy are vying depending on how fast I can get somebody to look over them from those countries and tell me,
Okay.
feedback on if I have everything okay.
Excellent. And I've spent very little time in Mexico. For that being an example, even if I don't have a huge interest in going or going back, I still want to know, like, hey,
Mhm.
now I'm interested to know when I was there, did I do anything that I shouldn't have done? Is there something I should have done differently? And even just for me to say, well, now if I speak with someone who's going to Mexico, I can pass
Mhm.
along some tidbits of information and sound like I'm smarter than I am. So, yeah, very cool. So
Yes.
where can people find you, first of all? I know you have a website. I'm sure you have some socials. I like to kind of do that up front just in case someone doesn't make it toward the end, and I don't want to save it. So if you could list maybe your website and some of your socials, and where they can find you.
Alright, so the website is KristineMadera.com. That's Christine with a K, Kristine, Madera, like a mad era, Madera.com. Socials, I'm kind of off a lot of socials at this point. I'm on Blue Sky under my name, Kristine Madera. You can also find me on Substack, and that's really the only place I'm hanging out right now in socials. I just got really tired of everything being so, well, I've never seen the stuff that I wanted to see. It was all advertisement. So I just kind of like just sent them all on their way. And the other ones I really like better. And then you can find my books on Amazon always, and eventually on Barnes and Noble. So you can find my author site on Amazon at Kristine Madera if you want to look at my author stuff. So that will continue to be updated as books are published. And I do have another novel that should be out hopefully by the end of the year that takes place in Papua New Guinea, which is a place I spent 26 months as a Peace Corps volunteer. And so that's a culture that most people will probably never encounter on their own. So that might be a fun read for people maybe in 2027.
That is so excellent, and I keep wanting to kind of get into the our actual, the conversation
Yeah.
that I planned for, but this happens to me every time. I'm just
Oh,
selfish. I
yeah.
get interested in things, and so I'm like, I'm just a child. So these novels that you write, obviously
Mhm.
they're loosely based on or somehow based on your experiences that you've had, which is fantastic. So you're not just looking up stuff and researching things on Google and
Right. Yeah.
creating a novel out of this. You have firsthand experience with some of these situations and whatever, but are the characters or any of the storylines loosely based on anything that you've actually experienced yourself, or is that part of it created by your incredible mind?
Well, I will tell you that when I was volunteering at Mother Teresa's Home for the Dying, and I was in the one in Calcutta, and Calcutta is a big, intense, hot, steamy city. And, and it was and I'm not a big blood and body fluids person. And my husband, though, he was a hospice volunteer. And so he was like totally in his element. And I would do what I needed to do in the hospice area with the feeding and the bathing and stuff like that. And then I would go to the roof and hang up laundry. And so a lot of the hospice stuff I pull from that to go into the book. But when I was up doing laundry one day, there was a guy up there, a British medical student. Now this is like in March, April. So, and I didn't make this connection at the time, but it's a British medical student. He was talking about how he was in medical school and stuff, and we were hanging up sheets. And at the time, I was thinking, well, if you're a medical student, why are you up here hanging sheets? Like, there's a whole bunch of sick people downstairs. Why aren't you there? And it wasn't until later that I thought, well, what is a British medical student doing at a hospice in the middle of the school semester? And that kind of got the creative juices going because I was really trying to kind of give myself some mental distance between me and the very intense work of working in the hospice. And had already had another character who had just kind of kept showing up and saying, "I am here. What are we going to do?" And he made he ended up being the main character, but that story began to grow from there. So the hospice experience is real, but I did transplant it to Varanasi, which is it's a much more contained place. And it has a very particular atmosphere to it. And the Papua New Guinea one, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, so I was in the rural area, but it takes place actually in the 1970s when, like, the tribe that I would have been in they would have been contacted, but they would have been quite remote. And I pulled from a lot of the stories that I'd heard people tell, some missionary stories and things, and the different kinds of volunteers that I saw there. And both, how volunteerism from other countries can both help and distort and harm local culture, and how the interaction of, Westerners coming in to help, because you're supposed to go in there and you're supposed to help because that's what we're trained to do. But that's not really always all that helpful. And how, how the dynamics of a tribe can change when that happens. And then what can go catastrophically wrong. And I will leave it at that one.
That's perfect. That's so awesome. I'm very excited to check these out, actually. So I will definitely be a customer of yours.
Oh, great.
So let me ask you, at what point of your life did travel become a thing? Was it something you had growing up, or how was that introduced to you? When did you start traveling?
I started traveling in my mind from the time I was very young because I thought life was pretty boring. So I tried to do a lot. I had a lot of escapism things I was trying to do. But one of the things that I would do because I recognized, and I won't go into this whole thing. If you get my website, you'll see it. But I recognized how insular my life was. And my best friend growing up was Latvian. And so when I'd be at her house, they spoke Latvian. They had a different, they were the daughter who was my friend was American, but they operated with more like Latvian cultural things at home. So, and it was Southern California, so I had a lot of friends who were Mexican and, Asian and things, and people that I went to school with who were first generation, but you go to their house and you'd see these different cultures and things. So when I was a kid, I recognized like how limited my own experience was. And so I would go, and we had the World Book encyclopedias, right? This is back in the day. And I would look for some country that I'd never heard of, and I'd read about the country in the encyclopedia, and I would imagine myself either in the country or visiting the country and talking to somebody my own age and asking them about their experience. Now, I was making all this up based on what I was reading in the encyclopedia, because I had quite an imagination. But I was starting to travel really early through that experience. I'm really wanting to kind of get out of Dodge and see more of the world. And I had a teacher in sixth grade who was very interested in travel, and a lot of our curriculum in sixth grade was about other countries. And then in seventh grade, she was one of those teachers that was part of a program that you could join and to go to Hawaii. So like I earned the money and I went to Hawaii, and we did a lot of cultural stuff in Hawaii. And that just kind of whet the appetite for that. And I was an exchange student then in high school. And, all my friends would buy cars and things, with their work money. And I was earning money to buy plane tickets because that was my highest priority, was to get out and travel.
Okay, so I'm gonna say the catchphrase and the title of the show, but then I'm interested to know like what was your first trip. So I'm gonna ask you, Kristine Madera, where have you been? And if you don't mind starting from the beginning, like where was that first place that you went that was just like, okay, wow, this is great.
Well, that Hawaii trip was the first place I went as I was only about 12.
Yeah.
And so going on that. Okay, that was cool. But the place I went, so the first big trip I went on myself, I was an exchange student in high school to Australia. And that was the first place like that I really had some autonomy and had to deal with things myself. And so that was a really interesting one because I landed in a very rural coastal part of Victoria, which is the state that Melbourne is in. And I landed on a sheep station. And so weirdly, like I don't know how I got there, but I landed at a sheep station and I was helping to shear sheep. And they had this beautiful view of the ocean because it was right along the coast. And it was the school that I went to was like kindergarten through, high school. There was only 4 people in my high school class, like the whole years 10 through 12. And the family was quite interesting and we had some problems. So I ended up calling my, what do we call them? I guess the person who's your resource to help. And she got me out of there and I ended up in a different part of same general area of Victoria, but a different home and a much more interesting place for me. But it was Australia. That was the place that I went to first myself, and then the next one after that was I was a college student. I did a semester abroad in London. Then after that, I moved after college. I moved to Japan and taught English. So, and then it was just as much as I could get for as long as I could get it in terms of travel.
Yeah. So at that point, it's your appetite is whet, and you're just like starving for it as much as possible.
Pretty much, yeah. Because I don't like trips. I've never been a person who like, "I'm gonna go for 2 weeks here." Like, I wanna go and stay. Like,
Right.
I wanna go and be somewhere for a while. I don't wanna just go and visit. So, for me, going somewhere for 2 weeks is just I mean, it's like eating 1 potato chip, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Right. You can't eat just one. So okay, so I don't. Let's see. How do I want to take this? I guess let me ask you:
Mhm.
if you and I were just sitting down, we just met, and we're just having a conversation, and you were like, "I have to tell you about this trip that I went on and this experience I had. It's the most amazing thing." And like that, those couple stories or experience, I'm sure it's hard to choose, but it's like, what's that first one that we're sitting down having a beer or a glass of wine or a coffee? You're like, I have to tell you about this.
Alright, so the one that it would be was I called it my faithcation. So, because I'd had an experience when I was young that I, like, was, like, done with life, and I'm like, "I need to know why I'm here because this place is crazy," and I had this really blowout experience of community consciousness, like, you just of really, letting life live through me and just entrusting life as the flow of life as something that I could actually follow, and so that kinda was a back burner thing for as much as until this particular time where I was getting ready to leave Japan after I had been teaching English there for about 14 months. And you could get a plane ticket home, or they would give you that much money to go to buy your own ticket. And it was a choice point between going home and like, getting a job and doing the whole thing, or, really seeing how much I could trust life like, could I really trust it? And if I really trusted it, well, under what parameters did that work? And for me, that was going to the place that scared me the most and traveling in a way that I didn't have, um, like a safety net. And so I went to Beijing, China, and this is in the early 1990s. So they had just gotten a KFC was their first Western restaurant that they had. They had just gotten their first three-star hotel. It was just coming out of that cultural revolution kind of period. Everybody's still wearing the Mao suits and it was just really opening up to business and things. So I went there and I was terrified. I got off the plane and almost threw up. Like I was just really terrified. But I lived through that whole trip was for me was to continue to put myself in situations where I could not rely on what I had learned to navigate the situation. I had to trust life and I had to trust that life was working for me and to help me move through situations. So I spent about 6 weeks backpacker style traveling around by myself in China. And then I took the train from Beijing to Moscow. And this was during the fall of the Soviet Union. So hit Moscow and you're supposed to be there through interest, but we came in the back door. So, you're there with no interest, meaning you had to find your own place to stay and you were basically staying with people and you were kind of like not illegal and not underground, but not really a sanctioned visitor because you weren't there through the official travel thing. So I had to figure out then how to navigate that, how to get through, different parts of Russia and then into the Baltics and then to Poland and to London and stuff. So it was that trip that really would be the one that I would go in depth about. And I can go in depth as you want to about it, but I don't. I could talk for 3 hours, so I don't want to do that. I will let you lead that conversation if you want to go deeper.
Well, this is the one thing I'll say, and I have said it to guests before. The worst thing in the world that could happen, I guess the best thing in the world that could happen, is we only get through a couple of stories because they're just so meaningful and so impactful for you, because those are the things that I can feel those things at least.
Hmm.
That's kind of what I look for. You don't have to go that in depth if you want, but if there are certain experiences in those, which it sounds like there are, that really impacted you, some people would listen to what you just said and the choices you just made and go, those were crazy decisions. And I don't use the word crazy. I don't mean it like not taking away
I
from,
know what you mean.
you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
no worries.
But
Yeah.
can I ask you this, because we didn't actually talk about this? When you went to college, did you go to school for psychotherapy or did you go for something else and that happened later?
No, I was interested in psychology when I went to college, and I actually started as a psych major, or a sociology major, one of the ologies, and ended up after I had met I talked to the psychologist for a while, and he would talk about like how he worked with people for 5 or 10 years, and I'm like, well, why would you have to work with somebody for 5 or 10 years? I'm like, isn't it faster than that? And so I realized like that would just make me crazy. And it's one reason I became a clinical hypnotherapist because I knew about much faster ways to help people shift and change if they wanted to. Psychology has its place for people in particular situations, but that was not me. And so I had always, since the time I was a kid, been trying to like, well, how to use the subconscious to change? How do I actually change this? Like I was very proactive in like, this is a problem. What do I do about that? And figuring that kind of thing out. So that I circled back to that later. But in college, I was still trying to get out of Dodge. So I ended up as a international business major and also Japanese. So that's why I went to Japan after that because I wanted to. My plan was to go to Japan and stay there. And then when I got there and I was teaching English, I was realizing it was very, very hierarchical, which is okay, but it was also very, male dominated and women didn't have much of a place at the table. And I thought, well, if I'm going to stay here, like I just end up serving tea, so that's not going to work. So I, decided I was gonna come back and do something else. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, so
So,
psychology
so it
has
wasn't that
always
you
been
finished,
an
you got
interest, but that
a
was not my major.
psychology degree and then, okay, that makes sense. I just wondered because, a lot of people will go and get a degree in something and then not using that degree for whatever reason or shelving it for a while. I just wondered if,
Yeah.
how that choice to go to Japan right after college and do that was how that came about. But that makes total sense now. Um, so whatever parts of that, I'm very interested to hear about because that sounds like that, China and Berlin, they sound like they were very transformative for you.
Well, Moscow rather
Or
than
Moscow.
Berlin,
I'm
but
sorry. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. So yeah, they were very transformative, and I'll give you a story to start with it's kind of indicative of how this trip worked for me. And I'd been in Moscow and I had friends that I had traveled with on the train and we got to Moscow and we stayed together in this apartment. It was an Afghani Muslim family and they were the only ones that had like 8 beds because we all wanted to be together. And so we're all men, women, all in the same room and stuff. And they were a really interesting family, but um and then it was, you had to stay with people there. And then my friends kind of trickled off little by little. And I got a ticket to St. Petersburg that somebody helped me buy. But when I got to St. Petersburg, I had the phone number of a friend who was there at some big hotel complex, and he was like a friend of the family, and I was supposed to check in with him because this is the days before internet, it's days before email, when international phone calls were terribly expensive and very difficult from Russia. And so I was supposed to, from my mom's perspective, check in with him to let him know that I was alive and, still kicking, and that I'd have a place to stay while I was there, and trying to orient. So I got to St. Petersburg, called, and the woman at the hotel said, "Oh, no, he's not here." I'm like, "I know he's there." So I called like 5 times, and they kept saying, "No, no, he's not here." And there's like 1,000 rooms in this hotel. I knew from something else. It was not in my guidebook, and it was off of the map in my guidebook, so I couldn't, like, even get on a train, get there, and get back and have a map of where I was going. And so I thought, "Well, okay, that's not gonna work." And I'd had a phone number, from somebody in Moscow saying, "If you need a place to stay in St. Petersburg, call this guy." So I called him, and he said, "Well, I've got somebody staying with me for the next 3 days, but I can get you after I can get call me out in 3 days and I'll hold the bed for you." I'm like, "Okay." So I'm sitting there thinking, "Huh." And the Waldorf Astoria was right next to the train station, but if I'd have gone there, I'd have had to sign up with interest, and that would have, like, messed up my entire rest of my trip. And it was $300 a night, and I was on a shoestring budget. So I'm like, that's not gonna work." So I'm sitting at the train station watching trains go in, and I'm like, "Okay, so what do I do?" And so I first sat with the idea, "What do I do?" And I'm like, "Okay, this is my plan. You're feel free to change the plan." I'm talking to the universe, but this is my plan. My plan is I'm going to sit here until I see somebody who looks like they speak English, and I'm going to go talk to them, and they're going to have the next step for me. So I sat there and I watched about 4 or 5 trains come in, and these 2 guys walked off, and I thought, "They speak English." So I walked up to them and I said, "Do you speak English?" And, they said, one spoke much better than the other one, and they were from Poland, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we speak English, blah, blah, blah." And I told them my story that I was just trying to figure out a place to stay, and did they have any ideas? And they said, "Well, it's interesting because we're traveling with an American Aikido, group who are doing like Aikido demonstrations throughout Russia for a couple of weeks. And there was a woman who was with them who wasn't able to come at the last minute. So then there's an extra bed and we're going to be in town for 3 days." And so I'm like, "Great." And they're like, and so they said they're coming on the next train. So we waited for them, and they gave me the bed for those 3 days, and I, gave them some money for it. But I got to do things that I never would have been able to do. Like, we went places that I wouldn't have had access to myself. And we had lots of good food, which was good because there was a famine at the time, and I was eating like street ice cream and railway station food. And so those 3 days were really cool. And then after that, I called the guy that had the bed, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I've got this bed for you." And so it's just things like that. And it's how the whole trip worked for me, that I would get to this place that was like, "Huh, now what do I do?" Because there's nothing here that fits any ideas that could work for me. There's no apps. And I had to really partner with life or the universe, whatever you want to call it, to create that next step. And that happened over and over and over and over again. It was the whole point of the trip. Um, and there was one other time that was really, well, a couple of times that actually really worked. But one of the times that was really interesting too was I was in Riga, Latvia, and I had gotten there, kind of by hook and crook doing the same kind of things. And I had my Latvian friend had given me her cousin's name and phone number to stay with once I got there. So I got there and I went into a tourist office and I said, "I've got this name. How do I contact this person?" She goes, "Oh, I know him. He's in prison." And I'm like, "Oh." She's like, "So, but," and there was nothing really, the fall of the Soviet Union, it was all over the place. There was Lenin statues in the streets and everything was in disarray. So there was nowhere, like nothing touristy was really working. And I spent about 13 hours in that tourist office because I kept having this feeling, well, if it works out, if you stay here, something will happen. You stay here, something will happen. It ended up that I got connected with these people who ended up getting me to my friend's husband's aunt and uncle's house by like 5 or 6 different steps. So I stayed with them for a little while, and I was gonna get on the train. I was still hanging out with this other group of people, and I was trying to get to Poland from there, and I bought a train ticket and didn't really realize when I was buying the train ticket that the train was gonna be passing through Russia again on the way to Warsaw. And I kinda and there was the office, the visa office was closed, like, everything was in disarray. So I thought, "Well, okay, I'll just take a chance with this." And it ended up that that first train ticket, the guy we put my bag into the baggage thing, went out for dinner, came back, and the guy was drunk and gone, and so I missed my train because my bag was in the cage, and the woman who had been helping me went and talked to the train station people and gave him this story that I was some foreign journalist and they had to get me another ticket because otherwise it was impossible to get a ticket. So I got a ticket and for the next day. And it ended up that we hit the Russian border and I didn't have a visa to go through Russia that second time through. And the guy was freaking out that had looked, he's like, why don't you have a visa? I'm like, the visa office was closed. And I was kind of hoping because there was 2 trains. One went through Lithuania, which I thought wouldn't be a problem. One through Russia, and I thought, well, hopefully that's not the train that we're on. But we and I was like, I didn't realize we were coming back through Russia. I was kind of played stupid. And so he was like pulling his hair out, but he ended up putting this very tall, good-looking, blonde, blue-eyed Russian soldier in front of my door, and the door to my whole compartment, which was actually really good because there was a guy in there smuggling electronics. So we had our own guard going through Russia where they were going to catch his electronics, or I wasn't going to crawl out the window and I don't know what, live in Russia myself. I don't know what they were thinking I was going to do. But anyway, I made it through. But I always wondered if I'd have gone through the day before, had that might not have worked out quite so well.
It's so incredible how, and obviously you'll never know, right? But
No, I won't. But that's what that trip was for. And that's how that trip worked out.
wow.
And there is a memoir being written about that. It's just slow going. So that will be out eventually.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. So you did reach Poland,
Mhm.
and how much time did you spend there?
I spent about, 10 days or so in Warsaw. I was there for a few days, met this nice guy that was or he was Polish and wanted to practice his English, so which was good because I spoke no Polish. And he showed me around and stuff, and, I was planning on getting on a train to Krakow and got there, and what I found out later was a hemorrhagic ovarian cyst that burst while I was waiting for my train, which, is like being shot on the inside of your body.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
I ended up laying on the train station floor for about 4 hours and watching people walk by. And it was really interesting because I could tell people were muttering, thinking that I was on drugs, and other people were muttering, thinking I was drunk. Other people wondered if I was dead. A few people brought me food. Like, it was like the whole sort of, watching humanity walk by as I really couldn't do anything about I couldn't even stand. I couldn't do anything about anything but watching everybody's, expression as they went by, the people who were concerned and compassionate, the people who were judgmental. It was an interesting way to pass the time. And I ended up leaving there and sort of limping my way to another place to stay in Warsaw. I stayed for about another week recovering from that. So I didn't get to see very much of Poland, but I did have an interesting other experience coming out of that. And I had gotten a plane ticket because I was done at that point. I'd been sick. I was done. I was tired.
And you never went to did you ever go to the hospital for that, or did you just kind of work through it and then you found out later?
No, I didn't know what it was, but it didn't seem to be like I kind of checked in with my body, and it didn't seem critical. It seemed like it was under control. And so, I kind of sat with it for a couple days wondering if I should, but I didn't know how to do that in Poland, right? Because who knows how you do that in another country.
Right.
And
Especially
so I
when you can't Google it.
no, you can't Google it. I don't know where anything is, how anything works. And it didn't seem critical. I wasn't sick in the sense of like having a virus or something. I didn't have a fever, so I didn't think there was an infection. It was just something that was quite painful, but it was not on the same side as an appendix. So like I was kind of going through like my own knowledge and saying, okay, I don't think it's this, I don't think it's this, I don't think it's this, and it was getting better. So I just thought, well, okay, we'll just work with that. So I got a plane ticket and I was flying to London. I was going to stay with a friend that I met in China. And so it's this Lot Airlines. And I get on the plane and as I get on the plane, there's this very strong voice that says, "Get off the plane, it's gonna crash." And I'm like, "What?" And the voice is a very strong masculine voice that says, "This plane is gonna crash. You should get off this plane." And I am like, "No." I sat down in my seat. Huh?
At this point, how many times have you flown in your life? A number of times, right?
I flown a lot, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I flown and it wasn't been catastrophic, but it took me a week to get the ticket. Like, I had to wait a long time to get the ticket. I mean, I tried to get that ticket, right away. So it must have been maybe I was there for closer to 2 weeks. But it took a long time to get that ticket, and I got a youth fare ticket. I'd been a businessman, from, Canada or the US, and he walked me through how to get that youth ticket, which are harder to get, and I couldn't get a second one in easily, which would have raised the price by, like, 5 times. So, again, shoestring budget, right? This is the whole backpacker experience. And so I'm on the plane and I am like, "You have got to be kidding me. Nope, the plane's gonna crash, get off the plane." And I flung myself in my seat and I said, "I am not getting off this plane. If I'm not supposed to die today, fix the plane." There was a few extra swear words in there, but that was the gist of it. And so I'm sitting close to the front and, I'm just kinda got my arms crossed and and part of me is thinking, if this plane is gonna crash, it's probably a pretty good idea to get off the plane, and then part of me is like, "But then what am I gonna do?" And so I'm just kind of like, "I'm just gonna see how this plays out." So I'm sitting in my seat and, people are boarding and stuff like that, and it's like they're trying to turn on the plane, like, it's like the engine won't turn over, and I'm thinking, "Huh, this is really interesting." And so, there's a lot of hubbub in the cockpit, and these 2 guys walk into the with these blue, mechanic suits on, and one guy's got a wrench and a screwdriver in the back of his pocket, the other guy's got, like, a hammer, and they go into the cockpit, and I'm thinking, "Huh, this is really interesting." And they ended up taking this section of cockpit out, and I'm like, at that point, I'm like, "Oh, the plane really could crash. Yes, this plane is gonna crash. If this plane gets off the ground, this plane is gonna crash." And I'm thinking, "Huh." So, and I'm having this conversation with this voice. And then I was finally like, okay, if they start closing this door, I'm going to jump off the plane. But I'm like, this is really interesting. So ultimately, after about an hour or so of them pulling things out of the cockpit and trying to bring things back into the cockpit, we get an announcement that they're going to deboard the plane because there's another plane that's going to come and take us away. So I was about 6 hours late getting into London, but my plane didn't crash.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's just incredible. Like you had no visual indication or anything before the inner
No.
voice that would have triggered something to say, "Wow, wonder why there's so many mechanics around the plane," or anything like that.
No, because there wasn't. I mean,
It
it was a regular getting on the plane, and I had no experience in Warsaw, like, every airport's totally different, and, this was the Iron Curtain at that time, so it's a no-frills airport anyway. So I didn't have any context in which to see that there was anything wrong, and I don't think there was anything wrong that because it seemed like the thing that triggered it being not working well was that somehow when they tried to turn the engine on, it wasn't working properly.
does it make you
And they
wonder,
tried
like the universe was speaking to you, right? And you refused, and so is there a part of you that thinks, well, so the universe played a part in this and saying, okay, well, if she's not going to get off the plane, we're going to do something different.
I don't know, like, that's another thing, I'm like, did everybody else who was supposed to die on that plane, like, die in the next week? Like, it was interesting thought, or whether this was just a playful experience between me and the universe about the importance of listening, because I heard that voice again, it told me to marry my husband, and I was like, "What? You gotta be kidding me." And but the voice had earned its credentials, so I trusted it, because it was a very weird experience, like, that whole experience about us getting married, so but I trusted the voice at that time. It's the only other time I'd heard it since that time that I'd heard it. So I had trusted it because it was so accurate at that point. So I don't know if it was like a scenario in which we would have been told to get off the plane anyway, and like the universe was just having some fun with me, or if it was actually something that, had I gotten off the plane might have taken off. I really don't know.
It's so incredible either way. So
Yeah.
incredible either way.
Yeah, and I'm much less bold now when it comes to things like that. Like, if I hear something that seems really solid, I'm much more apt to say I will question things, but I'm rarely do I say, nope, that's not going to happen because I've learned that if something comes in quite powerfully, it usually has some accurate information.
Yeah, it's really awesome. So, okay, well, let me not to jump around a little bit, but so at this point you go to London. Not that we need to go chronologically through everything, but let me just ask you this: when did you come back to the States? Not we can take this as sort of a sidetrack, but I'm just curious.
Oh, London was my jumping off point to come back. I
Okay.
had actually, while I was in Russia, I found out I got into grad school in Vermont, and that started, I believe, in January. So I knew I had to come home for that. I had the fantasy when I left that I would just continue to travel. But then I found out I'd called my mom somewhere in maybe it was in Poland. Maybe it was in Poland because yeah, 'cause that kid was with me, and he helped me figure out how to make a phone call, and so I called from Poland, so I couldn't call from Russia, and, I called and my mom said that I'd gotten my acceptance letter to grad school, so I had an end date, and I figured I needed some preparation times. So Warsaw went to London, and London came home, so I probably got home in the end of October, beginning of November or something, so that I had some time before grad school.
I never did ask you whatever happened with because you never did connect with that person you were supposed to connect with to make a phone call in Moscow, right? Or St. Petersburg it was.
No, no, he went back and said he'd never heard from me. Now, I was kinda writing home a little bit, but letters didn't really get there, so, when my mom has letters from me from this period, nobody has a letter from Russia, so there nothing got through when I
Oh
said
wow.
things from Russia. So that's why I called in Warsaw because now that I'm thinking about it, because once I left Russia, I thought I should probably call and tell her I was
They
alive.
had to have been
Um
panicked to some
yeah.
degree.
Well, yeah, because I mean, once I was in, I didn't even call from China. Like I wrote letters and stuff, so they got some fairly regular correspondence. But I mean, this is the days before any kind of really easy global communication. So I was like 23 years old, and my mom, bless her heart, was like, "Well, I can't stop you. So what do you want me to bring from the States so that you've got what you need to leave from when you're leaving Tokyo?" So she went to REI for me, brought me a bunch of travel stuff and things like that, and her friends thought she was nuts. They're like, how did you let her do that?" And she's like, "She's 23 years old. She's living in Japan. She can do what she wants. She's not gonna listen to me anyway. So, why not help?" So I always felt very blessed about that.
Have you given any thought to? I imagine you probably have. Have you? And this isn't necessarily truly a travel related question. If you had never taken that trip that we just talked about, how different your life would be today?
Oh, I have no idea. I honestly, it was such a choice point because it was the real choice between, am I gonna go and try to live a conventional life? Or am I going to really test drive this vision that I had of what life could be if I really trusted, the flow of life versus trusting what everybody says you're supposed to do. So I don't know what it would have been like. I kinda think I'd have gotten home in my fantasy world. I'd have gotten home and been like, "Okay, how do I leave again?" Although if I went to graduate school, because my graduate school was very international oriented. So I'd have been back out, I think. Because even when I was in graduate school, I was trying to get back out. I was gonna join the Peace Corps and go back to Russia, actually, was my dream.
But you did end up joining the Peace Corps.
Yes, but not at that time.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a different type. So I was wanting to join the Peace Corps, and I had it was just when Russia and the old Soviet bloc was opening up, and I really wanted to do things there, and I wanted to do like cooperatives. I wanted to use my business training and all that. And there was kind of a recession time at that point in time, so it was a lot of really experienced business people who were using the Peace Corps as a way to kind of subsidize a trip to make connections to build business. So I was kind of a back burner person, and my Peace Corps person who interviewed me said, "We can get you there, but it'll probably take 2 to 3 years because the line of people before you to get there is really high." So I had actually decided to bide my time, and I was looking for a place that I could work that I didn't have to get an apartment and all this kind of stuff. And I had ended up, this is where I ended up in rural Appalachian, Pennsylvania, doing social service work. Ended up using it for my internship for my graduate degree. because it was such a crazy experience in terms of cross-cultural stuff. Um, and ultimately met my husband there, and then we ended up going to the Peace Corps together a couple years later.
Okay. And I was going to ask you, I think you kind of answered the question. You said your graduate school was very international based. Because I was going to ask you, like, even though I understand the experience you had, starting in China and going all the way to ending up in London, that whole
Mhm.
experience was probably pretty intense a lot of the time. And
Yeah.
so maybe any rational person would maybe need some sort of a break from that. But because travel was so important to you, I guess I just was going to ask you, like, why did you choose to go back and go to graduate school when you could have probably continued to just travel more and see more and experience more? But if there's a lot of international base in the graduate school, I guess it sort of makes sense. You kind of do it all.
Well, yeah, and because I had realized that Japan was not the landing spot for me in terms of international stuff, I thought going into this program, it was through the School for International Training, their program in international management was their master's program. And a lot of people for that program either went from the Peace Corps to that program and then on to like USAID, the World Bank, some of that kind of stuff, and a lot of international relief work, or they would go there from having different kinds of, because you really needed to have, if not international experience and cultural experience, some kind of life altering experience to be able to get into the program. And they would go from there into the Peace Corps or into some kind of like ESL program, or a lot of people would go into the international student exchange part of universities and that kind of thing. But everybody either came from international experience or went to international experience. So for me, that seemed like a nice way station to, again, somewhere else.
Well, sure, it makes
Um,
total sense actually. I mean, when you explain it. So you end up in Pennsylvania. You meet
Mhm.
he's obviously not your husband at the time, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I didn't mean this to be necessarily like a, hey, let's just go through your biography and your
What is the most interesting parts of my biography? I have to tell you.
so you end up in Papua New Guinea. Is there anything in between there am I missing anything travel wise?
No, but I will tell you about that voice, that second time with with that voice, because
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. Please.
yeah. So I was in Pennsylvania. I had been I'd been there for about a year or so, and I'd been running a jobs program during the day for low skilled workers, and I was a night resident director of an emergency shelter for women and children at night. So it was like a 6.5 day work week. And I was trying to figure out how to get out of there because, like, once you're there, I was working. There's a Catholic religious community, very small religious community, not Catholic. They were trying to get me to be their like token ecumenical, and I wasn't particularly interested in any of that. I was there because I could hang out and do good work and do interesting things while I was waiting for the Peace Corps, and ultimately ended up doing my internship for my graduate degree and stuff like that there. But I was trying to figure out how to get out. And because they just kept kind of putting me in charge of things. And wait a minute, how's this going to work? And so my husband, who's 31 years older than me, had come to help because his family was from the area, and his sister was a sister at this religious community, and he'd come to help his father because they had a farm, and his dad had cancer, so he was helping out on the farm. And he had retired from the military and stuff, so he had been doing hospice work and things like that. So he just took time out of his life and came out. And his sister said, "Why don't you come and volunteer at our mission for a while?" And he was like, "Well, how long do I have to go?" And she said, "A year." And he said, "No." And she said, "3 months." And he said, "Okay." So she tells me, "Oh, you'll like my brother. He's weird like you." And I'm like, "What? Wait, what do you mean by that?" Because I didn't think I was weird, but apparently I was. And he came and he was odd. He'd had this near death experience. He kind of had a worldview like me, like that life kind of shows you what it wants and helps you move through it, and you just have to trust and go with the flow and all that kind of stuff. So I'd known him a little bit. We hadn't really interacted all that much, but we'd done some things and had talked a little bit. And I was mashing potatoes one day. I'd done them about 6 weeks. I was mashing potatoes in the kitchen with like a little hand masher. With my dinner date, and he comes up to me and he cuts down on one knee and he says, "Will you marry me?" And I'm like, "What?" And this voice says, because I'm in shock basically, and this voice says, "This is the best thing you can do with your life." I'm like, "What?" And this is the best thing you can do with your life.
Wait,
I'm like,
wait.
"You've got to be kidding me."
How well did you know him at this point?
I knew him for 6 weeks or something. I mean, I hardly knew him. I mean, we got along and,
Yeah.
it was fine, but this wasn't like neither of us were like, well, no, okay. For him, he said his story is that he saw me loading or throwing bags of cement on the back of this truck in tight jeans and thought, "Oh my god, I'm gonna go to hell on the mill with a men." And asked his sister, like, "Well, who are all these sisters and stuff?" So she points everybody out and she goes, "Oh, that's Christine," and she's not even Catholic. And he's like, "Oh, thank God." But he had no real designs on, like, I mean, that was just weird, just, to wanna marry me or anything. So he in his story, he heard a voice that said, "Ask her to marry you," and he's like, "What?" But he doesn't question. Like, I'm like, "What? You have to explain this to me a little bit." And he's like, "Oh, okay. I'll go do that." Because he does his near-death experience, like, he, like, just didn't question. It's like, "That's the directive. That's what you do." So he does this, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So the voice is like, "This is the best thing you can do." I'm like, "He's old. This is the best thing you can do with your life." I'm like, "I don't even know this guy. It's the best thing you can do with your life." I'm like, "Are you serious?" "Yes." Like, "Okay." So I said, "Yes, I'll marry you, but not right now because this is really freaking me out." And, so we ended up I got kicked out, but, because we kind of secretly got involved and long story short, head sister kicked me out and he didn't get kicked out, interestingly. But we ended up I went home and came back after Christmas and he picked me up and we've been together ever since. And so yeah, that was that. That was the voice. I don't think I would have I'd had I not had that voice, I don't know if I would have followed that because that was so far outside of my realm of like what I was interested in doing in my life. I wasn't interested in getting married. I was interested in getting out of the country. Like that was it. But here was this giant boomerang in my life that came in and, it has been the best thing I could have done at that time, I think.
I just wonder how many times and how many of us have voices trying to talk to us, but we're not. The way we're programmed is not to accept that or listen or even realize that it's there. Or we hear it and we go, I don't even know I don't even know what's happening right now and just ignore it.
Yeah, but if you think about all those times that you're like, I knew that's what I should have done, and everybody has those stories. And you've got so we have that part of us talking to us all the time, those intuitions telling us all the time, but we're not taught how to follow those. And we're not taught to trust those. We're taught to trust the mind. And the mind will shut that down very quickly because it likes to stay in control. And so oftentimes, like, you'll hear the intuition and then the mind kicks in within a half a second. And then later on, when things go like, ass over tin cups, you're like, oh, I knew I should have done that. Like, that's what my first impulse was to do this other thing. And that's what I should have done. And we have enough of those experiences. Ideally, we begin to pay attention. But you have to kind of train yourself because the mind will so quickly hijack the intuition unless you start to really slow it down and say, huh, that was my intuitive hit. I'm going to go that way.
So absolutely fascinating. And it's something else we could definitely spend more time talking about. And I would love to if I didn't have a travel podcast.
I
And
understand. Yeah.
I do this stuff too. And because I get so interested in things that I start taking us into a different path, but it's so
hmm
interesting. And so how quickly did you get married after that?
A couple years, because I was still waiting for the voice to say we were kidding. Not that I didn't think he was wonderful, but I was like, this is just so not what I expected my life to be. But we did end up leaving. Like, I left there. Went to Santa Fe for about 7 months and had an interesting met like the guy Applewhite who was running the Kevin's Gate cult. It was a very interesting time there.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
but I know. But then we had another kind of interesting thing where we were, kind of I was recovering from living in that place, and Joseph was, he was like this old time Sedona healer after he had his near death experience. So he'd pull people in off the street and heal them in the apartment and stuff. And we had met this woman from South Africa, and she was like totally into what we were doing, and she was like, I want you to come to Botswana and work with a friend of mine. And so we're like, okay. And so, so we had thought that was a valid request because she was all planning about it. We can go here and we can go do this. So we thought, fine. So we gave up the apartment and he'd have the leased car. So we arranged to turn the lease back in. And, we were going to drive our stuff to LA where my mom lives and then fly out from LA. And so we had already sold half our stuff and had given notice on our apartment and notice on the leased car. And she's like, I've decided to stay. And I'm like, oh, what's this? So we're like, okay, so obviously we need to go somewhere. And we decided to go to India and just get a one-way ticket and see what happened. And so that's how we got to India is we were supposed to be going to Botswana and South Africa and that didn't work out. And India, you know, just kind of was the place that spoke to both of us. So we bought a one-way ticket and we landed during a plague. So we were the last flight in. And we traveled around there for India and Sri Lanka and Nepal for about 8 months. So we did end up going international fairly quickly and then came back. He had some family stuff he had to do. I had some family stuff I had to do. And then we got married almost just a little below 2 years after he had proposed.
And the voice said, well done.
Basically, yeah.
So I hate to
So
say
you just said, thank God she finally did it.
she didn't listen when I said to get off the airplane, but we fixed that for her. But at least she did it this time. So I'm looking at the clock. I cannot believe it's been over an hour already.
Oh my gosh.
But I still want to hear about your trip to Papua New Guinea. And I know you also spent some time in Australia, New Zealand. Actually, I'll tell you what. I'm interested to hear about Papua New Guinea if you don't mind. And then you can take us anywhere you'd like for the last little bit before we get to our final 5 questions.
Okay. All right. So Papua New Guinea, we were in the Peace Corps. And so if you've not been in the Peace Corps before, you go 2 or 3 months before you get put into your final place. And so we were, part of that time, we were in like a village situation. So we're living in a grass hut. We're doing the whole sort of village thing. And it was really interesting because even though it was part of the town or it's called town, it's more like a small city of Goroka at the time, it was really it was really very much a village sort of experience. People in Papua New Guinea, the formal employment there is very, very low. It is mostly subsistence farmers. Most people probably outside of the city still live in, depending on what kind of traditional structure they lived in. So sometimes they're like woven reed walls. Sometimes it's more of like a grass topped hut. The place that we were at, both in Goroka and in the village area that we ended up being in, they had these round huts and houses there's no windows or anything. So there's a door, like a kind of this very unsecure door, and woven round walls and a grass roof. And you'd have to have smoke going all the time in the fireplace in there. So a lot of people were sick a lot of the time, especially kids with respiratory illnesses. And the smoke would go up through the grass roof and keep it fireproof, or not fireproof, waterproof. Because if you didn't have fires in there on a regular basis, the gummy stuff that kept it kept it waterproof would break down. And when it rained, and a lot of places rained a lot because it's a very rainforesty kind of area, it would have water coming into your hut. So it was a really primitive in many ways experience during that training. And we ended up working in a station, which is like a little government center in Morobe province, which is still fairly rural. And a beautiful, beautiful area. I mean, it seems grassy mountains and that kind of stuff. And I was a director of a nutrition program for women and children. And my husband was supposed to be an assistant carpentry teacher at the vocational school. But as soon as he got there, the actual teacher of the carpentry program left. And he's like, oh, I need to go visit my family for a couple of weeks. And he never came back. So my husband ended up running that program, and they had no wood. So that was interesting because and being very clever, I mean, it's a retired military, so we've always had to be very resourceful. And they had very little wood. So he scaled down, like they'd supposed to be making tables and chairs and stuff like that for people to sell to earn money for the program. But since there was no wood, that they couldn't do that. So he scaled things down. So they're making little teeny tiny thing like doll furniture so that they could learn how to make it at scale, and then they could scale it back up when they got regular wood and more funding. So he was trying to figure that out, and there was a time when we got there was, it was a drought, so the school had no water, and even before that, he was able to do that water witching, when you take the stick and you find water. And so he had found water and they were digging a well and then it started raining. And so but then everybody thought he was some people thought he was spooky and some people thought he was, like,
Almost
very
holy or something.
pretty much. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. But he did have this time with his stick. Like there was these kids, because these are all boys, it's a vocational school for boys, and they're all between the ages of like 13 and 17, and there was tools that started going missing, and so the teachers are like, we have to figure out who's taking the tools. And so he comes out with his stick and he's like, all right, I've got my stick and I'm going to be able to walk down here and tell who's stealing the tools. And they all ratted each other out, like, because nobody wanted to get to be on the bad end of that stick. So it did serve them well. They got all the tools back from that. But it was an interesting place. We were not in a village. We had a lot of people coming in from our villages, but we were in this little center where there was a lot of volunteers. There was us, there was two other Peace Corps couples, there was a German volunteer couple, there was a New Zealand family that was there. So the couple and their son who were there. So we had a lot of international people there and a lot of people from kind of the professional class of Papua New Guinea, that came in from other areas. And then you had the local people that would come in, and the local people they still wore the grass skirts. The men had bows through their nose. They had, wore traditional kind of boar's tooth jewelry, carried bows and arrows. So it was a real mix of different, um, it was a real mix of people, everything from kind of, the more modern things with the sat phones I think there was one sat phone, with the sat phone and computers and a generator. We had electricity for 4 hours a day. And then people who were coming in, just a half a mile down the road to, miles up into the mountains that were coming in that lived completely different lives. Like they were carrying in, their produce for the markets, and they were carrying in their kids to the medical center. And just fascinating to see all of the different levels and layers of that country and culture cohabitating at the same time in this one very small area. I mean, it was like that throughout the whole country, but in our area, it was so apparent between that there was the modern life and there was life 2,000 years ago, and they were both still cohabitating next door to each other.
And
Yeah.
how long ago was this?
This was 1998 to 2000.
Okay. Okay.
But even since then,
I was going to say, I wonder how different it really is today.
I don't think it is. Well, it would be somewhat more modern in the sense that, like, I saw a video that the road between where we were and the next station up, which was up this really rutted hill where they had these smoke bodies and stuff. And, 2 hours up this rutted road is now this paved highway. And I thought, wow, like now they have trucks going up there. So things have changed in the sense that things that had to be either flown in or put in the back of a truck over these very rutted roads now have highways. So they would have a lot more access to goods. I don't know how many other things have changed though, because they still wouldn't have lots of what we would consider paid work. And a lot of things like school fees require money. There's not like especially outside of the town areas, there's not many opportunities for paid work. And so some of the programs that were there when we were there, and in the book that I had written, was about the programs to try to get people access to money so that they could buy things like school fees and clothes and food, which is not always what people wanted to spend their money on. And there was this really interesting film that they gave money to, or they had money and they were distributing it either to the women or to the men, and they had to have their plans for what they were going to do. So the women, when they got their money, like they got a teacher and they built a school and they were, doing micro commerce and stuff. And the men bought a truck, and but they had bought a truck and they drove it to a place where there was no gas. So as soon as the truck ran out of gas, like the truck was done. And it was showing the difference between what people did with money and the understanding of how things actually work. Like that you couldn't, like a truck couldn't live outside of the infrastructure for a truck, and the understanding of how life actually worked. Because when I was there, and even before that, and probably since then, the cargo cult idea was still alive, where if you, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. So if you build a road, the trucks will come. If you build an airstrip, the planes will come, and it'll bring things with them without the understanding of the larger infrastructure needed to support those kinds of things. So I'm sure some of that has changed as people have gotten a little more sophisticated in terms of how the world works. But I don't think there's much paid work. And I think that a lot of people are probably still largely subsistence. Then they pulled the Peace Corps out because it was getting more violent, and there's a lot of violence against women, and there's a lot of political violence, and it's a country that has had a lot of growing pains, because there's like, I don't know, 1,500 different languages there and cultures. So it's not like there's a homogenous culture of people who have a common ancestry. It's 1,500 different tribes and cultures, each of whom have their own stories and ancestry, trying to figure out how to run the country together.
It's so very fascinating. And it's not a place we talk about because I don't think many
Mm.
people that I've talked with have been there. And it's not, typically a travel destination, I don't think. So, yeah,
No.
it's really fascinating.
And I will say, if people who want to go there, I would go to an outer island at this point,
Okay.
where you can get a flavor of it. It's much more relaxed out there anyway. And you get a flavor of the country without a lot of the peril of traveling in the deep interiors and even the cities in the main Papua New Guinea mainland, which is in the eastern half of the island of New Guinea, uh, right above Australia. But I would go to, and like New Britain, go to New Britain.
Okay.
Great.
Noted. All right, Kristine. So we're getting close to the end where we get to our final five questions. But
Okay.
I just want to, is there anything that jumps in your mind that, like, because you've traveled so much more than what we've talked about in the last hour plus, what is the, like, if there's a story or an experience that we would be remiss if we don't hear from you about this, what is that? Anywhere in the world you said.
Wow. Okay. We've hit a lot of the highlights because those are the big stories. But one of the interesting stories, huh? Let me think. Oh, okay. No, okay. One of here's one.
Okay.
When we were in Nepal, so we we got to Nepal, and we were in the Kathmandu area, and we went outside Kathmandu for a little while, and I wanted to take a hike, for like a day hike. And in my guidebook, and I've never been a great hiking trail follower, but in the guidebook seemed like a pretty simple hike that Prince Charles, when he was a prince and much younger, had taken as like this 4-hour jaunt through the mountains of Nepal. So I thought, well, if he can do it, if we leave in early in the morning, we'll be back. It won't be any problem. So we start out on this hike, and I don't know how I got lost, but I'm sure it was me. I had the guidebook, and but Joseph's like, I'm following you. So anyway, it's getting to be dusk, and I had no idea where we were. And we got to this tea shop and communicated to this guy, like, can we stay here? Because we don't know where we are. We don't know how to get home. And he was very accommodating, but he was obviously like, oh my God, like here's this woman staying in my house, and I'm not, he was by himself. There was no other woman there. And that was obviously causing him stress. But, since I was with Joseph, that was okay. But you could tell he was really kind of stressed out about it. But, and in that particular place, it was very rural. Like, there was no outhouse or anything. Like you went out into the yard and you found a place that you hoped you weren't stepping in something, and you just went out and pooped and peed in the yard and came back in. And he was very sweet, and he gave us dinner, and we slept in the he had, like, a little loft above the tea house, so we all slept up there, and he put up this blanket between him and us, and that was so cute. And the next morning, he gave us breakfast and stuff, and we were like, what we had no idea. We're like, "Tell us what we need to pay," because he was like, "Oh, no, no, no." I'm like, "No, no, we're gonna pay you. Tell us, what do we owe you? Please tell us." And he sat there for, like, an hour figuring things, and I could kinda hear him thinking, "Well, this is what I would normally charge, but I wanna charge them more, but I don't wanna charge them too much more." And it was still this ridiculously low amount, and we, like, gave him, like, 10 times more than he asked us for, because 'cause we're like, "Oh my god, you, like, totally saved our lives." And then he drew, a much better map, and we went to this place, and we ended up zigzagging down this hill to this place where we were supposed to find a canoe, and then somebody would take us in this canoe across the lake to this place where we could catch a train or a taxi back to where we had started. So that was kind of fun, and it was another one of those times it was like, "Oh my god, like, we got ourselves into this mess, and what's gonna happen now?" And I think most of life, like, in my view, like, 90 to 98% of people are good people who want to help you, who are very open to connecting, and are even if it's an unfamiliar situation, are like, "Yeah, I'm gonna help you because 'cause you're a fellow human being, and I'm gonna choose to trust you," and it always really validates that for me, like, when I have these, like, kind of experiences.
Yeah.
Um, so that was one that I thought was kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think we've sort of touched on this on the podcast before, but I think like a lot of us probably have the opposite percentages in our minds that,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, like 90% of these people are probably thinking that we're gonna, murder them or we're gonna rob them or,
Yeah.
they don't want to help us. And we've talked about on this too, like imagine because I've heard so many stories of people being in other countries and other cultures and having those experiences like we kind of alluded to at the very beginning, and you kind of mentioned like when you go out of maybe whether it's your comfort zone or not, but where you have conversations with people, you learn what their different you know what their things are that they do in their culture, and you can interact with people. You'll find that the people will invite you into their homes, they'll cook you
Mhm.
meals, they'll bring their whole family, and they'll have a celebration. And just like we've said, like imagine being in my home near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and someone just knocks on my door
Yeah.
and says, "I am lost. Can I come in?" My
Yeah.
initial response is, "You're trying to mess with me, and I don't
Mhm.
know what your actual agenda is." And I think it's just such a difference in cultures, and I wish that it was more like that than this, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think, we are taught to be suspicious of one another. Now, I've had great experiences here too of people helping me, but I think it's another one of those things where if you can hone your intuition, then you kind of know who to approach and who not to approach. And you also can kind of tell if somebody is approaching you, whether they're coming from a place of like, real need and open-hearted, please help me, or, if they're really wanting to take advantage of you. And we've had both of those too. My brother ran into this guy that said he was from Australia and brought him home, and we let him have spend the night because he had this sob story, and he left the next day with my brother's very pricey camera equipment in his backpack. So you never know. But that is kind of where if you can begin to develop your own sense of people, your own intuition, and put your preconceived notions aside, that you can have very different experiences with people than you might if you always lead with, what are they trying to get out of me?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Okay, well let's jump into the final five questions, and
Okay.
I'm not in a rush for time. I just, we usually go
Okay.
around an hour and a half, but so you please feel free to expand on your answers as much as you'd like. So,
Okay.
all right. So question number one is, and I always say it this way, but because you haven't heard it, I phrase it very carefully. Of all of the
Okay.
places in the world that you have ever been, what has been your one or two favorite meal experiences that you've ever had?
All right. This is not a favorite in terms of, wow, that was a really delicious meal. This is a favorite in terms of it was being very memorable. So I was in China and I was traveling with um, three other people. And we'd gone down the Yangtze and done some different things. And we'd gone out hiking and we were exhausted when we came back. It was very hot. It was very steamy. This was in the southern area of China and where they had hot pot. And so we were like, oh my God, we have to go here. I mean, we need some hot pot. They only had warm beer. So we're like, whatever, so we're drinking that. And we thought we'd try hot pot because that was the thing to do. And so we're not in a tourist restaurant, we're in a Chinese restaurant. And it was an outdoor restaurant. So like the pots are going and everything's steamy and we're sweating and all this stuff. And the guy comes out and asks us what we want in our hot pot. And we couldn't really communicate because we needed some kind of protein. Like we're like vegetables are great, but we needed some kind of protein. He was trying to explain to us what that was. And so he just kind of gestured for somebody to come to the kitchen. So we sent the one guy, which was a bad idea, but we sent him to the kitchen and so the guy comes back out. I've got our vegetables in the hot pot boiling, and the guy comes out with this big platter of little tiny brains. And he poured, and we're all like, no, as he like slides all the little brains into the hot. And we're like, why did you bring us out? She's like, it was this or chicken feet. And so that was the two things that they had back there. So we're like, well, okay. So, we made him try the brains first. And he ate it. He's like, oh, it's not too bad. And we were all so starving and we needed something besides vegetables. So we all ended up eating the brain. And we were trying to, and then we stopped doing this because we thought we were kind of freaking ourselves out, like kind of animals were these brains from. And they were very spicy. Like you could feel brain texture, but it didn't have a flavor besides hot peppers and garlic and all the stuff in hot pot. But we amused ourselves for a while, like trying to figure out what kind of animals they were from, and then we decided we didn't want to know.
So you finished the vegetables, and that was
We did the best. We got through as many brains as we could, and we decided never to send him to the kitchen again.
probably a good choice. Oh, that's excellent. Okay, that's a first. That's a first on the pod. Question number 2. I've mentioned this before. It's probably my favorite, just because of the variety of answers, and some people don't have an answer, and that's okay. So, question number 2 is: of all the places in the world that you have been, even if I came to you and said, Kristine, here's a free trip, you and your husband go have fun, you would say, no, thank you. I don't want to go back.
The only place right now, and it's really because of right now, I wouldn't go back to Papua New Guinea. Not because there's still not 90% of wonderful people there, but because it is very intense right now, and um, there's just a lot of danger in traveling there. I mean, I might go to like New Ireland or something, but it's probably not a place that would be high on my list to return to at this time. Now, if it calms down at some point and I felt safe going back, I think it would be interesting to go back. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So I'd say Papua New Guinea.
Okay. And that's very, very fair. And that's a great reason to not go back to someplace. So question number 3 flips that around, and I also add a little caveat. So of all the places in the world that you have been, if you could only, for whatever reason, you could only travel to 1 or 2 places left in your lifetime, what would be those 1 or 2 places that you have been that you have to go back to?
But I have been that I have to go back. I would love to go back to the Baltics, particularly Latvia and Estonia, because they have had so much interesting change. Like they were so vibrant prior to becoming Soviet bloc countries. And when I was there, they were just emerging from the Soviet bloc. And Estonia in particular has become quite international, and Latvia to a certain extent as well. But it was very European even before it was a European bloc country. And I would love to see how things have changed there. So those would be the 2 places that I would go back. Now, I also spent 15 hours in the Thailand airport, and I'd love to go back to Thailand, but I hadn't seen it, if anything, but the airport to say why.
Okay. Well, that's a good reason why, actually. So excellent. Okay. So now a little different. Question number 4 is: of all the places in the world that you have never been, but again, same caveat, for some reason, you could only make 1 or 2 more trips in your lifetime, what would be the one or two places you have never been to that you absolutely must get to?
Well, I'm gonna put all of South America into that since, it's a place. And there's multiple places within South America I would really like to go to. So I will put South America there. And then that I haven't gone to a lot of places and Vietnam. I really want to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, that's actually one of the top places on my list as
Yeah.
well. So I feel you.
Mhm.
I feel you. So I'll get to question number 5. Before I get there, is there anything that's popped in your mind that you wanted to before we, any other like story or anything that popped in your mind before you get to our final question?
There was something that popped in my mind, but it popped back out again, so it's not there.
Well, if it comes back after question 5, it's still you're still on the clock. We're good. So
Okay, okay.
okay. And question number 5 is super simple. So you know the answer to this question, Kristine. What's on your docket? What do you already have planned? Where are you going?
Right now in my life, I am at a place where I can't really go anywhere. There's some constrictions. Like I said, my husband's 31 years older than me. He's not really in a space where he can travel, and so even really far from where we live. So right now, I'm kind of I'm live in Asheville, North Carolina, so I live in a beautiful area, so that's nice. So I can enjoy the area that I'm at. And that's one reason I started writing the Etiquette Express travel guide so that I could travel while I'm writing to places to see what's next. But if I were going to project out into the future in terms of where I would like to go um, in a docket, I would like to go to Mexico for a period of time to travel through there because it also, again, has become a much more cosmopolitan, grown up kind of country than the Baja California that I used to go to. It was more like the party place and stuff. So I've grown up and I do go to more grown up places, and it as a country has become, really a real player in the world. So I'd like to do that and see Mexico and learn Spanish so that I could go to South America and travel around South America, which has been really calling me for a long time. So I think, if I buy a ticket, chances are it is somewhere south.
Excellent. We have so many similarities, honestly. Like so many times, for some reason, Latin countries have been calling
Hmm.
me up
Yeah.
through the time that I've started really traveling, and I've tried to start learning Spanish a number of times, and I don't
Hmm.
have I just can't keep the concentration, and my attention span is something about it. But I'm going to keep trying, and maybe we can learn together somehow. I don't know. We can
Okay.
figure that out. We can practice Spanish together someday.
Okay. Good.
Honestly, Kristine, this has been such a fun time. I cannot believe the time went so fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate this. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. It has been. And so, in lieu of the other story or memory or experience that slipped your mind, just is there any last things, any words that you'd like to say to the listeners before we wrap?
I would just, whether people who are listening to you have traveled or not, always keep that global mindset. Even if you can't leave, like I can't leave, but you can have the global mindset of always looking outside of your own experience, outside of your own area, outside of your own country for a larger experience of life and what our human experience is, because our personal experience is always so limited. No matter how much you travel, you can't have all the experiences that make up, all of our collective experience. So as much as you can kind of keep opening yourself to new experiences, reading about different cultures, considering other points of view from other cultures, and broadening your horizons that way. Like, I think that's how you really can become a global citizen, even if you never have the opportunity to leave your home country.
Very well said. Very well put. Thank you so much again, Kristine. And we're looking forward to the release of your new publications and all of them as they come out. Make sure you let me know. I'll be keeping an eye on your website as well. And I hope everyone else does the same. And hope you have a great evening.
All right, thank you. And there is one more thing that will be on my website that I got to say before,
Oh, yeah.
that people that just speaking to that global citizen thing, as I do have, it'll be a free thing called like the art of belonging, and it's really about how to cultivate belonging in any culture, including your own. So if you've never traveled or if you've traveled and you've always felt like an outsider, um, look for that. It may not be there right this moment, but it'll be there soon. And that's another way that you can begin to cultivate that global citizen kind of orientation.
So awesome. All right. Thank you so much again, Kristine.
Thank you.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. It was another great guest with some great stories, as always. And I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.